Bryce, welcome to the product owner Ask Me Anything question. I should say Ask Me Almost Anything question. But this is really just a free-form audience interaction. This is your chance to ask us pretty much anything you would like to ask a product owner about whatever's on your mind related to folio or development or product management, or other similar types of things. I know there are a few of you hiding in the audience, and if you want to respond to a question that's asked, that'd be great too. So this is pretty free form. So since this is an Ask Me Anything, either I can ask the first question, or if anybody has a question they want to lead with, by all means, go ahead. All right, so since no questions out there, I'm going to start with a tough one. And I honestly don't know the answer to this. So if anybody does know the answer, that would be great. And that question is, what happens after the Z release? Where do we go? Are we sticking with the wildflowers, though? Do we have another 26 wildflowers? Oh, insects. That's a good thought. A, B, A, C, A, D.
Very fun coming up with some names that match those patterns.
Okay, so we do have people on Zoom, so let's try to use the microphones, please. No, it's fine. Umlauts. I like umlauts. Yeah, that's a good. Yes. All right. So I forgot all about that. So I'm Joe Reimers. I'm one of the newest product owners on the Folio team with EBSCO. I work on Thunderjet with acquisitions, and I've been with the project and the company since February of this year.
Yeah, they gave me the mic so I can start. I'm Tom Trott. I'm from Cornell. I just started on item states. So I know everyone's ears are now perking up saying, ooh, item states, 3 parts. Yes.
I'm Dennis Bridges, and I've been working on Folio for, I think, 6 years now, 6, maybe more even. But I work mostly on acquisitions, and I'm also doing some work on the enhanced consortial support functionality that's been talked about here.
My name's Julie Bickle. My official job is the project manager for the LMU in Munich for moving us to Folio. Back when we signed the MOU, our contribution was 10 of my hours, and I then started as a product owner in the circulation area for patron notices and staff slips, but I typically also try and jump in and help wherever needed in the whole circulation area. I've been here doing this for 2.5 years now.
All right, thank you. So are there any questions before I go to the list?
What is the status on manual order exports? Right now they're scheduled.
I was actually planning to answer with the microphone off, but what do you mean by, what exactly do you mean by the status of manual order exports? Yeah.
So right now people can schedule the exports using the integration section in organizations. But I do have people that often ask of when will they be able to manually trigger those exports? And I guess kind of along with that, is there any plan to adjust the verbiage for those schedules? Because I do see a lot of confusion when you're looking at daily, monthly, and what those intervals are.
Great question, and probably an excellent point as well. So as far as being able to manually run the exports, there is a JIRA story. So it's not written up as a feature, but it's not assigned to the Poppy release. So it would be Cosnalia. And as far as making adjustments to wording of the export, there's nothing defined. And so I would recommend, if you're getting that feedback, to add it to the acquisitions implementers topics that the SIG reviews weekly. And I think we're maybe 15 topics behind, but we are getting through a lot of that stuff. And ultimately, a story will be created for it. And then it'll either be assigned to like sort of an enhancement feature for a specific release, or it'll become its own feature kind of thing. So yeah, at the moment, it's not possible to run an export manually, but this was actually came up the other day as well. So it's feedback that we've heard before. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience or online?
My question is about the serials and receiving apps. What is the future for those apps? Is gonna join in just one, or just one disappear or not? Or
That's a very good question. And Owen promised me that he would be here today. He's so Owen Stevens is the PO for the serials management application. And I can't really, I'm probably not the best person to speak to it, but I think, give you kind of a broad strokes that the idea is that the serials management application will be used to manage patterns. And those patterns, and I might be using the wrong word when I say patterns, but yeah, essentially patterns that are a frequency of, how often this thing will need to be received for whatever period of time. So those patterns will generate pieces in the receiving app. So serials will be a separate application, but it will take advantage of the existing receiving application. And beyond that, anything that happens, so the schedule will determine how many pieces are created and when they are expected. And things that happen beyond that, like the receiving of those things, whether they have representation in inventory by an item record, that will all be part of the existing sort of receiving workflow functionality. So for serials and for other things, it will be all done in the receiving app. Yeah. So will it be connected with purchase orders and instances and holdings and items? So I've learned this here in the last couple of days, that a serials record, it will be, I think probably Owen would say, in most cases, associated with a purchase order line. And by doing that, you are associating it with one, or you're associating the check-in record with an instance. We talked a little bit about package purchase order lines, and I don't think it's exactly clear how that would be managed. But in general, you could have a package purchase order line that has many titles. You would be able to have one or more check-in record for each of those titles. So a purchase order line can have many check-in records, and a purchase order line can be related to many instances. So the example that was given was that you might have a title for which you're expecting certain volumes and issues at a certain frequency, and you may receive supplementary material at a different frequency, or, for that same title. So in that case, one way to handle that initially will be to have two check-in records for that one purchase order line and title. So it is going to be quite flexible. And the relationship between the instance and the purchase order line will control. So the check-in is basically unaware initially of the inventory records. It's going to rely on orders to generate and maintain inventory records as needed. So orders, pieces, and receiving, the way that it currently does. I hope that answered the question.
Hi. My question is related to the inventory records that you mentioned. These records are produced in a format that is not compatible with QuickMark right now. Will be a workaround for that or anything?
Yeah, so yeah, it's hard for me to speak to how they are or are not compatible with Mark, the records that are generated.
Yeah, they aren't, and they aren't. We have to export them and then import them in order for them to work. For yeah,
I see.
yeah. My question. Yeah, because we are still working with Mark, so our catalog is in Mark. So when we create the order, yeah, in the end, this record is like a pre-cataloging record, yeah. So it's no use if we can't edit them. You see, because it's a pre-cataloging record with, let's say, title, ISBN, whatever, but then we can't add, I don't know, keywords. We can't add anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe what's been the feature that is written that would be related to this describes an order being able to generate an instance that has a source of Mark.
Oh,
so it would be there would still be an instance record.
Yeah.
But it would sort of generate the source record at the same time. Not exactly clear how that would happen, but there is a feature. I have no idea what the number is, but we could look it up. Yeah, there's a feature that describes it in that way. So you would have an order record, generates an instance file that then triggers like the derivation of that into a source Mark record.
Oh, that's cool.
It's probably a horrible, but
yeah.
I just wanted to express how interesting this is to me, because until now I have thought it was a good thing that we weren't creating a Mark record at that point. And so it's always interesting to me, the many assumptions that I make and the ways that we can go wrong when we think we are simplifying.
See, I think it's a good thing that it's not in Mark, but there's an underlying assumption there, and the underlying assumption is that we are not currently working with Mark. If we'd be working in a different system, for instance, with BibFrame, that would be great, awesome. But now we have Mark, so that's the thing.
I mean, my library has a similar workflow, but for us, we are generating the Mark from somewhere else and overlaying. So it doesn't matter to us if the record that's in Folio, the preliminary record, we call it, it doesn't matter to us what format it's in. So different workflows, different needs. This is why we always want everything to be as flexible as possible.
There's an extra seat up here if you want to. It would be helpful.
I have another question for circulation rules. In our territory in Latin America, the universities, the most university doesn't use fee fines. They prefer to block user by days rather than charge some money for, and then that functionality is in the roadmap or not, or
That's an excellent question. Currently, there is no product owner for fee fines. So there is nobody so there are enough people in circulation. So if there's a bug you know, I've done it for myself. I've jumped in and I've taken ownership to make sure that that bug is fixed. But there is nobody who is taking ownership to have these conversations around fee fines to complete the backlog for such requests. And so that is then a request then to the community. If you would like to be part of the PO family and the smaller circulation PO family, we would be more than welcome to help you. As a small side note, there are also requests for my area, and I don't have the bandwidth to do them all either. The first step for getting anything programmed is defining the requests, but not just as a general 1 or 2 sentences, but properly refining it, the scenarios, the use cases, etc. If somebody is happy to take ownership of organizing that and pushing that forward, I'm sure, like, I've volunteered to then help with the logistics of, like, you know, what field do you fill out in Jira, and these bits and bats, so that hopefully maybe together we can get a feature and stories refined enough so that hopefully if there is capacity, a dev team would pick it up, because ultimately, you know, what gets programmed is what is refined. And sometimes it is so much as like, what features are ready to develop, right? And so if you know, we can, you know, reach out to me if you'd like more details, to take ownership of, again, not, you know, the logistics, we can help you, but if you take ownership of organizing these conversations, thinking it through, I can help you, you know, think it through, but have the meetings, come to the SIG, talk with people, so that we can, you know, the feature can get refined accordingly.
So that's a great segue into another question that we got, which is, since we're interested in building our PO base on full-time and part-time basis both, what would you say are the minimal skills required to be a PO?
Shall I start? So good question. I'm not gonna, so I'll name one part and then you guys can add on. I think I see this role, and so my background is actually in project management, so it wasn't too different. But for me, the basis is still this idea of you know, this concept of ownership, as in the tenacity to fight to make this move forward, right? And at the beginning, you know, I also don't know, but I say it's not rocket science in the sense it's a lot of asking questions. And then soon you know, you build your network. I don't, you know, I know more or less what I got to do. But at the beginning, especially, like, it's more about the tenacity to push this feature or this task forward accordingly. And, you know, it's iterative. There will be talks back and forth. You think you've got it sussed out, and someone comes with an excellent use case, and I didn't think about that, and it doesn't fit in. So we go back to the drawing board, and, you know, accepting that it is, you know, you got to keep at it. But that's also okay. You're not doing it completely by yourself. And yeah, I think that's a big first skill, the wanting to do it and the tenacity to keep at it.
I think that's an excellent point. Like the initiative, because people are going to throw, as a product owner, you get a lot of feedback, and you have to latch onto something and see it through clarification and refinement and implementation, and that requires you to be motivated to do it. And alongside of that, I think I was going to say the ability to prioritize, because you will get so much feedback, which is amazing, and we're, I think, very lucky to be in that position, to have a community that's giving us lots of feedback, and we want that to continue, please. But it requires you to then have the ability to formulate some methodology of focusing on what is most important. And I think, depending on what brings you to the community, the thing that's going to focus you is a little bit different. I work for a particular company we have certain customers, I need to focus on those things and draw connections to what other folks need and do my best, overseeing this area to make sure that I align those things as much as possible and come up with a something that everyone can use at the end of the day, or everyone can benefit from, extract as much value from it as they possibly can. So I think that's maybe the thing, if I could summarize that rambling for you, is the ability to focus in on the important things.
Oh, sure. Give it to the new guy. I'm lucky enough that most people don't know I'm a PO, so I've been flying under the radar, but now everyone knows I am one. So I'm probably going to I'll probably get a ton of messages on Slack. I would say with me, it's more of, I like puzzles, and everything that has come up so far is just that. You have to kind of follow every thread to its end. When you come up with a feature or you're looking at a feature, you not only have to think of, oh, I want to add this one button right here, and all that button is going to do is this. You have to look at, okay, how does that button affect this over here? And then how does that affect this over here? And then how does this affect over here? So being able to follow all those threads, but also realizing that you have no idea how the entire system works. You're not expected to know how the entire system works. And being humble enough to ask people questions. And honestly, that's sometimes when you get the best feedback, is when you start asking people open-ended questions and they just start talking and things come up that you would never even think about. So I'd say in my short experience, those are the two things I would.
Okay, a little bit of a follow-up to that. What would you say is the right balance between listening and guiding?
Another session? You're reusing questions over there. I think it really depends. I mean, sometimes I think you just have to sit there and listen. And again, this is what I'm saying right now isn't from my experience of writing up any ticket. Is what I've been observing as I've been learning. And I'm going to say, and Anne's here, so I'm going to say a big thank you to Anne and Stephanie for letting me shadow them. I've been learning a ton from them. And also watching Stephanie as part of the RA SIG and how she deals with issues and that. So I've been learning a ton from both of them, and I'm really grateful for that. I think you need to let people fully go through their thought process. At the same extent, I think you need to give people some guidance. When you give a group an open-ended question, they don't have a place to focus. So I think you need to give them that one starting point to start focusing on and then build off of there. That starting point might not be where you end up at. It might not be what the final product is, but it's giving somebody something to latch on to and go from and create from that. That's what I've seen this work from best from the opposite side. And that's kind of the philosophy I'm going to probably use going forward.
This is 3 days into the conference. This is getting a little difficult for the old brain. But I think it's sort of, my perspective is very much in line with your comments, that for me, I think it's more of, you are providing guidance in the sense of, you have to lay some structure down for the discussion. You can't give folks an endpoint, or they will just make their way towards that endpoint. So the guidance you're providing as a PO is a structure for people to discuss and be creative in, and obviously, capturing that detail. And we were talking about this in the PO meeting earlier, and I just think it's so important. As a PO, you have to acknowledge your bias and be very conscious of that. You are not building a feature for yourself. Even if you think you know what it should look like or what the problem really is and how to address it, you have to focus on the structure you're providing for discussion and accept the feedback that you're getting from that discussion and work from there and build all of your justification for design, etc., on the feedback that you're getting.
I like I'll have a third aspect, but I like the 1 point indeed, so that even if it's not the end point, it's giving somewhere for people to go. I like also the framework, because I used to say in my previous job, like, you know, when people ask, is this possible? And I like to say, you know, we've been to the moon. Technically, a lot is possible, right? That's not the right question. It's rather, how much are you ready to spend in the wider sense to make your request happen? Here with the balance of listening and guiding, on top of those, I like, and especially in my case where I'm not a full-time PO, I like to think of it as a pendulum. You should start off with truly listening, in the sense, you know, letting people talk, and then asking questions, but not trying to avoid thinking about, oh, I know how to solve that problem, but rather your aim is to, as much as possible, fully understand the problem and the context and the use cases from all kinds of different perspectives. And then you can go back, and depending where you're at, but you know, typically go back to your dev team, and then you can present it, and then you start figuring out how can that be solved. And maybe there'll be options, and that's where you can then go back to the SIG or to the group of users, and then you move the conversation forward with a bit more guidance. Again, here are some directions that we can go in. Here are the pros and cons. And then you have a next feedback loop, which goes back towards listening again. And you keep on going back and forth in that fashion until your features and your stories are refined enough so that programming happens. You'll keep on having the pendulum, because then you test and then you figure things out in programming that you didn't expect. But yeah, so I think it's, you always need both. Depending on where you're at, you will always focus more on one than on the other. Because if you just listen all the time, you don't do anywhere. And as a PO, you also have to at some point make some decisions. You can't do everything. Resources are limited. What do we focus on accordingly?
Okay, so PO work is very, there are a lot of deadlines, and there's a frequent pressure, and you're always busy, and there's always something else to do. So how do you stay motivated? How do you keep from burning out and collapsing under the crushing pressure of the sprint's about to end, and I've got 4,000 things to review?
It's an excellent question. I'm trying to think through. So okay, I'll be maybe brutally honest. So, for me, it's about, so it's a bit twofold, but, and I've used this in the past also, like, if push really comes to shove, I am not a brain surgeon. If I fail to meet my deadline, no, it sucks, right? And there'll be some difficult conversations. In practice, again, like, you know, there's a support network, so it works. But if I feel like, if I really fail, like, what's the worst that can happen? I look stupid. People think I'm incompetent. I mean, big deal, like in the grand scheme of things, right? And I use that for myself, and I use that sometimes in conjunction. It like when I notice when I'm starting to get to that like mindset, that's when I know I need to pause and I need to go away and do something else. It may feel like, oh my God, I'm losing time now, but it's what makes sure that in the long run I remain efficient, and the motivation to keep fighting and working at it. That's one way.
Yeah, this is a really tough one too. And that's a good answer. I think, yeah, it is, for me, especially recently, is about managing your commitment. Like not taking on, understanding that, yeah, if something doesn't go right, it's not the end of the world. Generally, maybe we're lucky. What we do, like someone's not dying on the table. That's a good analogy. And only filling your, like being reasonable about how much you can fill up your glass, because there is so much to do. You're only going to get so much of it done. I feel like if you're taking on this type of job, you're probably the type of person who likes to finish stuff, and you might struggle with not being able to finish everything. But so it's a matter of just being very open in your communication with people, with users, with your boss and so on, that you feel comfortable that you can take on this much. And if not, just be vocal and say, we need someone to help take care of this or take care of that. And to try and focus, which goes back to why I think that's kind of a critical skill, is that there is so much, there's kind of an infinite number of things that you could be doing. Just constantly thinking about or reevaluating, am I focusing on the right things right now? And having a bit of a criteria for how you identify what are the right things really helps continue on. And we're also just working on a really exciting project, so that definitely helps.
I'm lucky I haven't had to deal with this part yet. So I'm taking this all as nothing. Oh, I know. Oh, trust me, I know. But just in my regular job, so only 20% of my time is dedicated to the Folio community and PO. The rest of it is support for Cornell. And it's kind of along the same things. Is I know that I'm going to forget things. I know things aren't going to get deadlines. Everyone does. It's okay. As you all said, no one's dying on the table. When those have happened, I'm like, oh, okay, well, how did that slip through the cracks? Or I reevaluate and try to make sure it doesn't happen again, apologize and move on. When I have a ton to do, I blast my music as loud as I possibly can because I'm at home by myself and I'm not disturbing anybody, and just bury in and usually show up around my office around 7 o'clock. Sorry.
Maybe like because it feels like the negative, like how to avoid burnout. But I think I do want to finish on a positive note, right? I also need to remind myself sometimes, but I actually I do stay motivated just because generally I think this is just I love this job actually. It's really hard sometimes, but I just find it it's intellectually so interesting. I know that it's also an investment in my Julie personal skills, regardless of who I work or what my institution is. So for me, just being on the employee market, it is worth doing it at least. Also for me, as not being an employee from a commercial vendor, I have learned skills, or at least honed skills, that are actually making my life as the project manager and lead implementer in my institution much easier. I have, managing these conversations and the framework. I've got much better at that thanks to my job as a PO as well. And I know that the challenge, if there are any challenges that I go through as a PO, getting through them keeps on honing my skills and means that I am more efficient for my library ultimately, which is technically my main priority. And it just makes me a better employee, and just the thrill of managing, of solving these challenges is actually, when I get over the tiredness, it's just real. I just find that super fun. And I need to, remind myself of that from time to time, and make sure I set up regular opportunities for success where I can remind myself and I can feel this thrill again of like, oh, this is so cool how I've managed to solve this problem.
So related to that, I'm going to follow up specifically for the POs who are part-time or have day jobs. How do you manage that balance between doing your day job and doing Folio product ownership?
So the first for me is accepting that. So I started at 10 hours a week, and now it's no longer a commitment. It's more I do what I can, but it's never going to be 10 hours an actual week. It will be some weeks it'll be 3 days, and then some weeks it'll be 0. I think accepting that flexibility, but to be able to do that very bluntly, how I've managed it for myself, at least for patron notices and staff slips. Some people may have noticed there's little new development in that area because I don't get to it. I decided that to solve what I like for me is like core base stuff, there's documentation, the test cases are better, and my backlog is now sorted so that when I get a chance, when I'm not dealing with bugs or with Bugfest or any other thing, I can now, even with just half an hour, keep on working on my backlog little by little. And having got that set up means that at least within the relative little time that I have, I can still be efficient.
Oh, yeah. All Dennis does is PO work. I don't. Short answer. I try. I really, really try. Like I've done I'm going to block out this time on my calendar to just do this. I'm going to block out my time on my calendar to just do this. But the nature of my real, quote unquote, real job is that you can't schedule when something goes wrong in Folio. You can't schedule when there's a blurb in data import, or you have to test a dry run environment of Poppy. And well, that one you can schedule a little bit. Or there's a bug that a regression that popped up and you have to deal with it and start filing bugs. So as much as I try to schedule out time to do things, it's just impossible. So what I honestly end up doing 90% of the time is having a list of all the things that I want to do, all the things I want to look at. And when those breaks come up amongst the emergencies over here that I'm dealing with, I will just grab that and start working on that. And that's kind of how I balance the time out between the two. And I know it sounds really, really hectic, but my brain also doesn't like to do anything for more than 10 minutes at a time anyways. So it actually just kind of feeds into that. So it works.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I've kind of been dominating the asking the questions here. Okay, another question for the group. We'll knock off in just a little bit here, but just for general interest, about how much buy-in is usually encouraged from the community before a new module or a new feature can move forward?
Did you say like a third, half? I think it depends on the feature and how, like, I would say it probably also depends too. Like the one that was just being talked about here, which was the workflow engine. I'm all fully on board. Let's do it. I think also it depends on how the ramifications to other apps and how it could improve the core system. So I would.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really tough to say. I don't think there's a fixed number. We don't have a procedural rule for what, how many people need to say aye. It definitely depends. Whatever you're doing, how many other things does it impact? And I think the important thing is that if you're looking at implementing a feature that will have an impact on other areas or may have an impact on other areas, that at the very least you are consulting the product owners of that area and the SIG groups as you kind of move along, because as we said before, it's an open source community. Anyone can do work. And so people who decide to do work will have various motivations for doing so. And that's what will set your priorities, and that shouldn't stop you from doing something. So yeah, I think it's less about having a bar for acceptance and more about being transparent and communicating with the folks who are working in all the areas that you may be having an impact on.
Because, I mean, ultimately we'd like as much buy-in as possible, but as you said, it's open source, but it's also the culture of this project is that what's the word? Silent consents, or silent consensus, right? So typically, and again, depending on how impactful, how many dependencies, etc. But for example, in my area, I have a number of features where, in long story short, we've gone with it's more replicating existing functionality to just make sure there are more options out there. So ideally, it's not, it's not groundbreaking new anything. I still inform the community, this is working. Could you please, think through your workflows? Like I try to think about as much as possible, but you know it, give it a try. If no one comments, I'm not gonna not release this just because nobody has proactively said, I agree that this is okay. Technically there's no buy-in because no one's talked, but again, technically it's more that people would speak up if there's something really wrong, so I assume it's okay. But yes, please feel free to, even if it's just, yes, this is fine, that is always helpful to have that feedback as well.
So as kind of a follow-up question, is it numbers or noise that's more important when it comes to buy-in?
When I have the microphone, that's an excellent question. Yeah, exactly. So as with a lot of PR, it depends. So I don't have a definite answer, admittedly, right now. Yeah, go.
I'll say, yeah, it's a tough one because reality is reality, but I think you do your best to filter out the noise, or build some justification's not the right word. I'm searching, but I think it's sort of a combination. In reality, the noise is what alerts you maybe to the fact that you need to build a case for this thing. And if you're hearing noise, hopefully that triggers you to like you say, you post that comment in Slack, hey, I'm doing this, and someone says, you're insane, that can't be done. They might be wrong or they might be right, but you need to acknowledge that and then start to build your case. Say, okay, like there's some people who don't agree with this. Let's just be very clear about why we're doing it. Let's go back and just review, okay, what are the use cases that we built this on, the requirements we've derived from that, and why we derive those requirements. Try to explain that to the person. They may still disagree with you, but yeah, hopefully that answered.
By noise, I meant people who, like, maybe you don't have lots of buy-in, but you have some very, very vocal buy-in from a few people. So is it like lots of buy-in is more important, or very, very loud buy-in from a slice? As someone who's very loud myself.
And we appreciate that.
No, from my perspective personally, it is more number, because one feature may be super important for one small library and like very not important for a bigger library, and then what does big mean, etc. So, but in my case personally, like I don't know, maybe use an extreme example, right? It's like Library of Congress wants this, but everybody else says it's a bad idea. I don't know what I do in that situation right at this moment, except that this shows that there's conversation. One comment I would though add, and that was because thank you for saying it. So it also depends when the noise comes in. I try and organize it and communicate early enough so that people have time to speak up when we're refining. But I understand it is the nature that some feedback comes later. This is also the concept, of an agile and iterative release, that it is possible that this first feature does not fulfill all requirements. That doesn't mean that we can't address those later on, right? So I think even if there is feedback, and in this, we always concentrate on the negative, right? But feedback that's afterwards, that doesn't mean you haven't missed the train forever. We can still address this, and then as the cycle of development starts again, we go through the refinements accordingly, and the development goes on.
Yeah, I think there's an underlying reality of what certain people are paying attention to that will be a factor. But there was an amazing session at this conference that was titled, "If you're not at the table, you're on the table." You're on the menu. Dang it, I knew I was going to screw that up. But I think it's not the amount of noise that you're making, but the fact that you're participating in the conversation. That's way more important than how loud you are. Because if you're silent, you're not getting anything that you want necessarily, right? So
I'd agree with all that. And I would also add to, and I think Julie touched on this before, is if you're making a lot of noise on something that doesn't seem to be moving, I would suggest rolling up your sleeves and maybe adding more to the feature. Because a lot of the times, and I'm not sure if this is going to come up or not, the devs are kind of in their own little world. They know nothing about libraries. They know how the system works, but they don't know how things work at a circulation desk. So they need a lot of detail. They want to know what happens when you click this button, what error message is going to pop up, when should that error message pop up, should it be in line, should it be after it's clicked, should it be coming from the back end, is it a front end thing, all this stuff. And this is the stuff that the POs have to flush out and start creating tickets for them to actually code this. If there's something that you really want done and it's not getting worked on because the PO doesn't have a capacity, start writing up that stuff, even going into PowerPoint and drawing out a sketches. Like, this is kind of what I'm thinking of. And it gives everyone else, I mean, at least for me, I would say that would give me a starting point to say, okay, this is a great jumping off point where I can now build from this and it'll help move things along a little further.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My question is, community product owners are certainly a vital part of Folio's success. And my question is really for Tom and Julie. I'm curious how you all gained buy-in from your institutions to participate in this role, and how do you maintain it?
I was told if I want my job, I have to do this. I'm joking. So my journey to actually where I am is a little strange. I actually started out in at Cornell about 25 years ago, back in 95. I started in food science, moved to the library in 2000, worked in access services as ILS, pretty much everything except for tech services, which Laura's going to teach me Mark hopefully soon, because I don't know anything about Mark. And it's cute. Mark is cute. I like that. It has a cute name. It's just a lot of letters and numbers. I'm like, and it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, especially when I get a text field of all of it. But when Folio came up there at Cornell, there was definitely a need addressed for a full-time support group and somebody to help coordinate that support. So part of my job was I moved from where I was into that role. At the same extent, Holly Missenbauer, which a lot of you probably know who did PO work for years, was retiring. And Cornell wanted to continue to have somebody in the community to help give back PO time. So the timing was perfect. It's like, okay, well, here's this support piece that you're kind of already doing. You seem to be good at it. At least I was fooling people that I was good at it. And we also have this PO work over here. And as I was saying before, which is when you were asking about the skills, I love puzzles. I can sit and talk with somebody for probably hours on end, going through different scenarios of how we could change the system to make it better and do this, and all that stuff really excites me. I'll actually stay up at night thinking about it. So it was a perfect fit. So with my institution, it was kind of almost a natural buy-in.
And yeah, I have a bit of also an unusual path. So I'm not a librarian. And when I was hired, my job was to represent my institution in Bavaria to help determine whether Folio was a good replacement for the previous ILS. And so my boss's plan was he knew that I had a background in project management, and was to say, become a PO, because that way you'll learn about librarianship and you'll learn about ILSs and you'll learn about our new system, and then you can do your job. And that's how it actually started for me. In the meantime, there would be plenty of reason for me to stop doing it, because there's plenty more stuff to do, but I'm more the one who said I want to keep on doing it because I love this job. But also, again, it's the skills. It makes sure that I keep the skills honed, and it is helpful for my institution. So helpful for my institution. It's helpful for Bavaria. I like to think, and it gives my institution a seat at the table to a certain extent. To do my job, I do need to like be aware of what's happening in the community and in the project. And that is a very helpful information that I can then pass on so that my institution and network then becomes successful as well. And we've also agreed that that is a worthy investment for the output that we actually get.
I would just kind of add, if it is something that you're kind of interested in, and please allow people out here, raise your hand and say, yes, I'm interested in this. I would also advocate to your university and say how important you're in Folio. You obviously believe in the project. This is another way you can contribute to the project and make it better. Obviously, PO work does take a lot of time. I think the minimum is what, about 10 hours a week? Yeah. Yeah. But it is time well spent. And I think you could make the case to your university and say, this is stuff that we would like. Let me be a PO. Maybe I can help get this into the pipeline to be developed. So I would definitely put that on you as well.
Sorry, and to wrap that up as well. So, you know, we have, you know, there is documentation out there we can help. Like, so we say on average at least 10 hours if you want to be the full owner of like the whole workflow. But we have a number of ways that people can contribute. I think Laura like is an example of one. Like, even if it's just 5 hours a week, like there are so many things. Like, I know, documentation, organizing the conversations, testing, right? Even if we can find people who I could even say like, I know they will be there and they can test all my tests in Bugfest. Like, that would free up so much of my time during those 2 weeks that I can then focus on actual bugs accordingly. Like, any contribution is helpful. If being a fully fledged PO in that full ownership is too much, there's still plenty of ways that you can contribute at individual points along the development life cycle. Yeah, please do reach out.
Thank you so much for extending that conversation. And I'm very, very grateful that both of your institutions were very willing to participate in this. I'm curious if you would suggest for individuals who are interested in the role, but perhaps their institution is a little bit reticent to allow their employee or employees to spend so much time as a PO. Do you find that the PO community, the community POs, are supportive in providing tips and assistance for how to compel their institutions to allow for more participation? Because I think that I would really recommend that. I don't know if I'm necessarily in a position to recommend that, but I think it would be really healthy if we have a community of POs that supports each other in advocating for this role. Because I know that Tom mentioned that he highly values working with us, but it goes both ways. We learn and are developing smarter because Tom is working with us. And so I just wanted to ask if you do see that type of camaraderie with the POs, and you would find that it would be a good space for interested future participants if they need to do a little bit of negotiating with their institutions.
So there were a lot of points, but like short is yes, big yes, with a lot of exclamation marks at the end. To the point, like, so it is, I feel it's a very tight-knit community, a little family. I am, you know, I didn't get a chance in that PO meeting, but I'm so thankful to be part of this little group. An example for the Circ POs, we have our own little Slack channel that, you know, that we use for, you know, like, I need to vent, or am I crazy? Or, you know, I don't know. I'm nearly speechless because I have so many examples in my head. But the long story short is that you know, you're not left alone. There are no silly questions. You know, don't expect everybody to drop what they're doing right at the moment, but I've still found people are very available. If you're able to articulate what you need, someone will help you. And that's the general topic. From the detail of also, like, and I've said it, you know, for my area or for circulation, if it's like, I want to give it a try, but I don't want to commit too much, you can support just for individual features. You can support, even for me, I have like, my backlog is very long, and like 95% of it is in draft, because all it is, hey, I would like this. Take one, go have the conversations, write it in more detail, think about the scenarios. Just doing that is like so helpful. And then you can decide if you want to pursue it, or just that feature, or that kind of role, like just doing that part in the development, or then taking on an actual product ownership accordingly. Like I've said, like, I am more than happy to support anybody who is ready to help me in my area of responsibility.
Ditto. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how convincing I would be, but yeah, if you want to send a supervisor or someone to me, I'm sure that I could also ask my supervisor and Simeon to talk to them as well. I feel that Cornell feels is very beneficial to them. I know it's I love it, and I'm really glad to be part of the PO community and Folio in general. But yeah, I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody.
So I have to admit, when I first met Dennis, I was like, oh my goodness, it's Dennis, you know? So, and then
he does have that vibe about him.
Right.
It's like, it's Dennis.
And then I was the same way with Julie. I was like, ooh, it's Julie, you know? And so how do you guys deal with the cheers and jeers that come with product ownership?
Well, as I said, I just started, so I've been under the radar, so I haven't got any of that yet. So I'll hand it off to Dennis.
That's a good question. I hope I'm understanding it correctly. Jeers? Yeah. Okay.
Usually when I'm
yeah. Well, one of those happens a lot more often than the other. But no, I think when someone tells you you've done something well, you know, part of not burning out and so on is listening to it and accepting that maybe you've done something well, which I think can be hard for people. So yeah, those are always appreciated. And then the jeers, yeah, we kind of joke about it, but is pretty constant, because nobody's perfect and no solution is perfect. So I think just accepting the fact that it's not a personal attack. Maybe we're fortunate that this community is just, I think, good spirited in that way, that we get a lot of feedback, and sometimes it's negative, but it's not about you, and it's not that you've failed in some huge way. And it's generally not something that you couldn't correct, or that you may never get the opportunity to correct. You try and hear that feedback and log it, and you know, focus on improving, doing things better. I could see that being a barrier for sure, that you might, because maybe in reality it's not for everyone. Like it isn't easy to take things lightly in that way. But if you are looking for opportunities to grow.
Absolutely. I often say, like, I was not born thick-skinned. It's grown, and I train it and I remind it. But I mean, geez, yeah. I have never experienced anything really personal like towards me. Obviously, there's, you know, I do think it's a very friendly community. People also know that, especially in my position, you know, I'm not full-time. As it was said at the beginning, I think people do generally assume, positive intent. And when people ask me, like, where are you at with this feature that's been sat in draft for 2 years? It's not a value judgment on my competence. It is just highlighting how, you know, this is important for me, and therefore I do try and switch it to, it's not about Julie, you're late. Like, why aren't you developing anything? But it's again just more a reminder. Okay, this is again like a data point. This is potentially important. Do I want to rearrange my backlog and my list of things accordingly? Yeah, G's never really got any hard. And again, I think, especially in my case for me, the framework within which I work, I have a number of hours. I have listed my priorities accordingly, bugs, testing, documentation, and then if I have time to new features out of pragmatism, and I've communicated that accordingly as well. And that gives me at least then the the argumentation to encourage people to help for new features, right? And that's how I deal with it.
I'll say maybe just one more thing, that because I've definitely come out of meetings, especially earlier on when things were more ethereal, feeling like, wow, that was brutal. Like I just got lit up in this meeting, and maybe I'm, maybe I need to quit. Like maybe I'm just not, maybe this isn't for me. It didn't happen much, but also you kind of that's going to happen, I feel like, to anybody in any job, right? So it's not unique to being a product owner, I wouldn't think, but just trying to be empathetic and thinking like this person, again, it's not a personal attack. Well, hopefully it wasn't a personal attack, but just trying to think from their perspective of like, I get it. Your perspective on this is that I've missed the mark completely, and to be open to that and try to think about, okay, what did they really mean by this? So just focusing on that aspect of it, not focusing on, wow, I've screwed this up completely. Try to get at, well, how could I, if I'm looking at it from their perspective, how do I improve this thing in that way?
So I'm going to get rid of PO cap and put on my support hat. And because mainly I end up messaging Dennis, probably usually every May. And I will freely admit, I am one of those pesky Slack users. First of all, when I heard about POs, I thought they were mystical unicorns. There were these special creatures that did all the magic behind the curtain. And if you saw one, don't try to talk to it or touch it because you might scare it away. But from my standpoint, I want to say is every single PO, especially Dennis, has saved our bacon so many times. It's not funny. And I'm really appreciative of all that. And 90% of the time I go to them, I'm in panic mode because the people that I'm supporting are in panic mode. And I try to say as much as possible, thank you. I really appreciate the time you put in. And I think on our end, we need to do that to POs. But I also feel that they kind of understand that we are, like, as people that they're helping, we're coming to them when our institutions are flipping out. And we're not trying to personally attack them. We're just like, we really need this to work, or this really needs to be done, or what do we do if this doesn't help? So yeah, I just wanted to say that on my support side. So.
Okay, it seems there are no further questions, and it is the last session of the day. And so with that, I think I would like to thank our panelists, Julie and Dennis and Tom. Thank you so much for being here with us. And those of you traveling, have safe trips home. If you're staying overnight, have a good last evening in Chicago and try not to cook off too much. And see you next year.